Thank you very much for taking the time to have me here today. A lot of you guys know me. You've been writing stories on me since I was probably 14 years old. I think, Mike, you wrote the first story on me. I'm obviously a young guy. I ran for Plymouth Borough Council right at the time I was starting my company at the end of my high school year. I was doing some business ventures, plenty of time before that. But after I decided I wasn't going to go to college and that I was going to start a business here in downtown Wilkes-Barre, I decided to run for Plymouth Borough Council. I've been on that council for roughly 3 years now. I think it's a little bit less. I think I'm going in my third year. Where I ran on the idea of revitalization. I said I saw this small town that was, as soon as coal left the industry and as soon as it was stripped out of the economy, we had a town that was just lost its sense of pride. Property values were decreasing, crime was increasing, and I thought maybe we need somebody on council with a little sense of business experience, even if it was 1% as the young guy I was. And so I decided to run for that council, and that was roughly 3 years. And across that time, I've dealt with COVID. I've dealt with having to hire police officers. We dealt with police officers going off into the state troopers and going off to other towns. And so, the story of Plymouth is pretty much the story of a lot of Northeast Pennsylvania, a lot of these coal region towns. And I dedicated my life to building the coal region back up again, taking Northeast Pennsylvania and making it the type of place where young people want to work, where young people want to stay. It certainly was an area that when I was in high school, teachers told you if you have any sort of potential, you have to pack your bags and leave this area. And so I stayed here. I started my business here. I ran for council here. I still live on Main Street in Plymouth. And now I'm running for state representative because my friends are $200,000 in debt. They're getting $35,000 a year jobs. They're not able to buy homes. And everyone seems to want to pack their bags and leave this area. And everyone that is left here in Northeast Pennsylvania, they're kind of naysayers. They beat down on it. There's a small group of us, young professionals that work every day across, the chamber and everyone and, all these different groups that are so invested in Northeast Pennsylvania. And I really do think this is going to be a place that one day excels. So, my work on the county manager search committee, we had to inventory all the assets Luzerne County has. And that's what was the most eye-opening for me, and that's what led to me running for this seat. On Plymouth Council, I experienced what we weren't getting out of our state representative. I had this grand vision of revitalizing Main Street, and we just didn't have the budget for it. There weren't many state resources. The state was shut down due to COVID, and I said we need somebody who's going to be an ally for our local government, somebody who's not going to be caught up in the national politics, somebody who's going to be a moderate, somebody who's just going to fight for the families like that I grew up in. My parents are two Democrat parents that middle America. Working class family, and I want to represent those people, and I want to take my knowledge as a business owner, take my knowledge as a councilman, and use that to actually be a citizen legislator and actually bring resources that can change Northeast Pennsylvania and take it to the next step.
Alec, you mentioned people in your generation unable to buy homes. I guess another issue involving inflation that is also hard to afford rent as well. What can the state of Pennsylvania do to address those problems?
Well, in terms of inflation overall, there's probably nothing we can name that doesn't come from a farmer and doesn't come from the ground. I think we need to be investing in energy. Pennsylvania is on top of the Marcellus Shale. The cost of goods are going up right now because of the cost of fuel, because of the cost of production. Certainly there's a talent shortage. And so if we're able to keep young people local, then we're able to solve the talent issue. That will solve for having to outsource and relocate these businesses. And if we're able to invest in energy, then we're able to drive the cost down of production. If energy is cheap and there's an abundance of people who want to work, businesses will locate here. High technical businesses will want to locate here. And the end consumer benefits overall, right? Because businesses at the end of the day are just pushing the cost down to the consumer when the government gets in the way.
Talk about energy. What's your position on the Nacero plant that could be built in the 119?
I'm 100% a supporter of Nacero. I think there's a misconception. A lot of people think that they're going to be drilling for natural gas in Nanticoke and Newport Township. They will not. It's a manufacturing facility. The gas is going to come from Susquehanna County where it's already being produced. It's going to be brought to Nanticoke and Newport Township, and it's going to be converted into gasoline. We're going to be able to produce a gallon of gasoline in Nanticoke and Newport Township for 90 cents a gallon. We have the Sunoco pipeline located in Edwardsville next to the Kmart. We're going to utilize that. We're going to utilize the railroad. And it's a $6 billion investment. I think it's the single largest economic investment in Luzerne County's history. I mean, if you look at a town like Nanticoke and Newport, where are you going to get that kind of investment? A lot of people are now starting to come after the warehouse work. They want to see what's next. Well, when you have a facility that's going to employ 3,000 union labor jobs and then 850 high-paying, high-technical jobs after that, that's going to be an investment in housing, that's going to be an investment in hospitality, that's going to be an investment in transportation. I think that is going to be the flagship that takes Nanticoke and Newport Township to the next step, and I think that's going to be, the core of what's going to happen next for Luzerne County. I mean, I think that's going to be the catalyst, if you will. So 100% support it.
Regarding the environment, what do you think of the state of the environment in Pennsylvania, and do you think the state is doing enough to clean up some of these abandoned mine sites and products?
I have the Sill Basin in Marksville, which will be part of the 119th district. That needs to be cleaned up. I know they're doing work in Sawyersville, where I think that's a coal, waste coal area there. So certainly that's needed in parts of my district, and I'd like to see cooperation from the federal and the state government, because that's not a problem that can just be solved by the state government. But I don't think there has been a lot of discussion in the 119th district about cleaning up some of this underdeveloped land and figuring out how we're going to use it. Now, where Nacero is specifically going, that's going to be an area of Nanticoke Newport Township that probably can't be used for much else. And so for them to come and clean it up, I think that's a great positive step. We need to do that in Larksville. Like I said, the federal government has to play a role as well in making sure that stuff gets cleaned up.
Do you think it's an issue of not allocating enough tax dollars for the cleanup, or do you think that the state should focus more on developing public-private partnerships to get the cleanup?
I think they're not going to make that investment until they understand what the land is going to be used for. So when you have that public-private partnership, when you have a business that says, hey, if you make the investment in this land, we'll relocate here, and you calculate the economic development dollars, they will do that. But and that's what we saw in the case of Nacero. Nacero approached and said, hey, this is a perfect location for us. If you're able to work out some kind of tax credit, if you're able to help us make this possible, we will do we'll carry out the rest of the contract on our end.
What is your platform regarding taxes in the state?
So Pennsylvania is not business friendly. I'm a business owner. There's a lot of issues. You look at states like Delaware. You look at states like Texas. We have to get Pennsylvania more business friendly. Now the legislation has taken steps to lower our corporate net income tax, which is going to happen over the next, I think, 7 or 8 years. But more has to be done. I mean, corporate net income tax is one piece of the puzzle, but we have to make Pennsylvania a business-friendly state, or else there's going to be no reason for businesses to come here.
What about property taxes?
We were robbed as citizens. We were told when the casinos were going to come to Northeast Pennsylvania, that was going to remove our property tax. Now, it does come to our cities in the form of an LSA grant, which does help and relieves the tax burden from the municipal budgets when residents want a new park or need a new police cruiser. LSA grants do help with that, and they do take reliance off of the budget that come from your taxes. But I think the people of Luzerne County, the people of the 119th district who I wish to represent, they want to see property taxes eliminated. I'd like to see it started with seniors, fixed income seniors, if we can work backwards. We have the homestead exemption in Pennsylvania that was never funded. It was passed in, I think, 2014. It was never funded. I think we should be utilizing tools like the homestead exemption to be, alleviating some of these burdens on the everyday person.
Now, if you are able to reduce property taxes, how would you make up for the revenue loss?
You would have to offset it somehow. Sales tax is one way people look at it. Now, if we don't want to see an increase in taxes, like I said, the homestead exemption is a good way to alleviate the burden without raising taxes.
Doesn't that money have to come from somewhere, though? I mean, you're reducing revenue to...
Well, the homestead exemption does not get rid of property taxes. The homestead exemption would still have property taxes, but you would only pay it on like second properties and third properties and fourth properties. Your main...
Well, I understand the homestead exemption, but there's less revenue coming in if you expand the homestead exemption. It isn't going to school districts, it isn't going to to counties, does it go to municipalities? How do you replace that revenue for that?
I think it would still, I think you'd actually get more money from funding the homestead exemption than you would not using it.
Funding it?
Yeah,
Who's going to fund it? The state?
yeah.
Where's the state get that money?
Well, you can cut expenses. You could talk about no net increase in taxes. I mean, these are, you have to sort of negotiate amongst all the 203 legislators. You have people who don't want to see any tax increases. You have people that understand that, sometimes they're necessary. So these are, larger discussions that go beyond, my personal beliefs. But I think most of the people in Luzerne County would take a sales tax increase in order to alleviate the burden.
You mentioned cutting spending. Is there any particular part of the state budget you would like to cut?
If you look at the marketing budget of the Pennsylvania Lottery, it's in the tens of millions of dollars. I think those dollars can be allocated to the services they're intended for, like funding seniors and funding veteran services. So that's one of the ones that I like to take on the campaign trail is look at how much money the Pennsylvania Lottery spends in just marketing.
One of the Governor Wolf has tried to increase subsidy amounts to the school districts, and that in turn will result in a reduction in property taxes. Do you agree with that concept of sending more state dollars to the school districts?
I'm not sure how that would work. I'm not familiar with that plan, but I'm also not sure how that would work.
Each school district gets a subsidy amount from the state,
Yep.
and it's increased, and the legislature has agreed to some increases in the last couple of years. There's also a lawsuit going on in Harrisburg, Wilkes-Barre
For the
area,
fair funding.
over fair funding. Any thoughts on the fair funding suit and the claims made by the plaintiff districts?
Well, your first point, I'm not sure. I guess the theory is by increasing the subsidy, you're not going to have to raise taxes as much to fund the schools. I am a supporter of school choice. That's one of my platform issues. Yeah, I'm not too familiar about that or how the funding structure should be changed.
And how does your school choice plan? How would you implement that? Is that similar to what Mastriano is proposing?
No, I'm far more moderate of a candidate compared to Mastriano. I have supporters of mine that have my sign next to Shapiro signs, and I have supporters of mine that have my sign next to Mastriano signs. My vision for school choice, perfect example is I have a family in Hanover Township. Every time I'm knocking doors, they're talking to me about how both parents have to work a second job to send their kid to private school because their child just does not function well in a public school environment. I don't think that if you're already paying taxes to support schooling, that you should have to work an extra job to send your kid to private school. I'd like to see those dollars follow the student. Now, I'm not advocating for defunding public schools. I'm not advocating for getting rid of those jobs. My mother works at Wyoming Valley West. I would send my kid to Wyoming Valley West. I'm a proud product of the public schooling system. I just think there needs to be a little bit more of competition just from my experience as a business person. If you want the quality of education to increase, if you want the price per student cost to educate to decrease, you need to introduce competition because otherwise there's no incentive for these school boards to want to make sure that the schools are actually working for the student and aren't working, for, just as another business.
Some public school board members would argue that the current system, because it drains money from the public schools to pay, really hurting school districts financially. How do you deal with that?
It's all about who you ask in that case, right? Again, it's probably not a perfect system. We would have to figure out how to make it work for the people. But I think at the end of the day, Democrats and Republicans agree on where we should be. The disconnect is how we get there. And so I think that you ask parents, they know that the public school system's not perfect, and they know the private school system's not perfect. We need to figure out how we get there. But at the end of the day, I think charter schools and private schools and Catholic schools, I think they should be an option for parents at the end of the day. I don't think they should be non-existent, and I don't think they should be too far out of reach for the everyday working class family of Luzerne County to use them as a for their child.
What do you think about how the state funds the cyber schools and the charter schools and the cyber charter schools?
There's a lot of wasteful spending there because you end up with students who leave the public school system, and this is just from my perspective as a student. I saw students, they leave the public school system, they go to an online school, they end up learning that online schooling is harder than in-person learning, as we learned through COVID, and they go back into the public school system, and so they're essentially, they're charging the taxpayer 3 times for that transition. So there's a lot of reform that needs to happen there because, they're essentially carrying more weight on the system than they should be.
So you would rather see the state give each student a voucher amount, and they could go to a private school or a charter school or a cyber charter school, or in fact a public school if they wanted to go in that direction?
Yeah, I don't think students should be limited to their zip code. If an inner city student in Philadelphia wants to go to a school in the suburbs, I think that should be allowed just as much as if if a parent wants to send their kid to a better vocational school. I'm a software engineer by trade, and unfortunately there's not a lot of STEM programs in Northeast Pennsylvania. So if a STEM program were to come to Northeast Pennsylvania that would teach kids how to become software engineers, I would want them to have that opportunity to go to that school and learn how to become a software engineer and not be limited to having to go to Valley West, who may not have a software engineering program just because they happen to live in Plymouth.
And if you live in the Wyoming Valley West School District, under your proposal, you could go to Dallas School District if you wanted.
Again, those specifics would have to work out. I don't know if it should be that extreme, but again, those are big problems we're trying to solve. I like to tell people I'm not a 100% knowledgeable on everything, but I'm a sponge. And I think that's what the people of Luzerne County are looking for. They're looking for a candidate who's willing to listen at the doorstep, not just tell them, these are the ideas I have, I'm going to 100% implement them. There's certainly agenda items of mine that I'd like to see get done for the state, but at the end of the day, I truly believe in, you're representing the people of your district, and so when you're at their doorstep and they're telling you about their concerns, being a sponge, knowing what you know, knowing what you don't know, and carrying out your duties that way. In business, if I were to, if I was going to make an investment in something and I didn't know 100% about that topic, I would reach out to somebody who's more knowledgeable than me and learn from them.
Do you think the state should increase education funding for the state universities, community colleges, and the CTCs?
Yeah, 100%. I think part of the problem we have such a debt epidemic right now with students is because we're pushing them to higher universities and not pushing them to trade schools. So I'm a product of that. I did not go to college after high school, self-taught software engineer. I think we should be pushing apprenticeships, mentorships. I think we need to be pushing, more students into the trades. We're running out of plumbers and electricians, not MBAs and lawyers at the end of the day. So I think, community college is a great option. You can go for 2 years at a fraction of the price. To do the same schooling you would do at any other university. So I would want to see those options pushed and not just be hidden. What
about the state universities? Do you think the state should provide more funding to get tuition rates down?
Certainly, if they're depending on what they're trying to do with those dollars at the end of the day, of course, what kind of research are they doing, what kind of projects are they taking on. I don't think the state should be building stadiums and ski resorts for schools, but at the end of the day, if they're actually going to some kind of program that's going to benefit the people at the end of the day, then I think that's a smart investment, right? We're investing in our children to be the next generation.
Regarding the economy and inflation, what do you think about increasing the minimum wage?
Right now, I don't think anybody's making minimum wage. I'm not a proponent of increasing minimum wage. It's not a priority of mine because right now we have a false floor in our work. Right, most people, you go work at McDonald's, you're making $16 an hour. You go work at Sheetz, you're making $17 an hour. I don't think there's many employees right now that are actually making minimum wage. So I don't think that should be really a priority of us right now with where we are economically in the state.
What do you think about the 2020 election, how that was conducted, and do you have any proposals regarding the administration of elections?
So I am judge of elections and a poll worker in my background. I've done it for 3 years in Dallas Township. There's a lot of changes that need to be made. There's a lot that we could do in regards to training. Certainly, I don't think our poll workers are as knowledgeable on the issues that arise on election day as they should be. And I think the county has since taken steps. There's a new elections director, and she's going to do things the way she's going to do. And I'm no longer with the election poll worker stuff. So I don't know what kind of changes they're making. But as of right now, one of the biggest issues we had is when people would come in, they're somehow on the absentee mail-in ballot list, but they're coming in to vote, and they're not being able to vote in person because they're somehow on this list, whether they went and renewed their license with PennDOT and they accidentally signed up for an absentee ballot, whatever government service, however they got toggled into it. There's an issue, and poll workers aren't trained on how to handle that to the best of their ability when somebody does walk in and they have an issue with, a mail-in ballot or an in-person voting.
Aren't they allowed to do a provisional ballot in that?
Yeah, but again, the fact that error occurs, I think is something that needs to be looked at. The Department of State allows third-party agencies to send out these requests for mail-in ballots. They look like they're coming from the government. They're stamped like they're coming from the government. Sometimes they even say they're from Tom Wolf. They're 100% not from the government. They're third-party organizations. I think we need to limit what a private organization is able to do, because it's the same thing I deal with in cybersecurity. You have people who try to look like the IRS, trying to extort residents. Now you have it in the election system where you have these groups that are mailing out, stuff that looks like official documentation, but it's not.
I believe your website says that you were opposed to no excuse mail voting altogether. Why is that?
It's not altogether, but it's, I think there are certainly people
No,
who,
I'm pretty sure your website said you would eliminate no excuse mail voting.
well, that's not my position altogether. I think there are, as I was going to say, there are people who can benefit from mail-in voting. There are people, depending on their jobs, if they're on vacation, if they're away, they cannot make it to the polls. I think they should have the ability to vote. I think everybody should have the ability to vote.
But that's an absentee ballot.
Yes.
So that's kind of separate issue.
What are you talking about?
Well, there's absentee ballots, and there's the more recent no excuse mail-in voting.
Oh, I see what you're talking. Okay, I see the difference you're making
And
here.
you're saying your website says you
I understand.
want to abolish those, yes.
Yeah, so I do think there is an issue with no excuse mail-in ballots and the drop boxes. I don't think the system is foolproof. Now, am I going to say there's mass fraud? I don't believe that either. But again, just to bring a sense of ease to voters' minds, this is a big issue in the district. People don't feel safe. I think in 2022, we should just alleviate anything that gives people doubt. And so if there's doubt around drop boxes, if there's doubt around no excuse mail-in ballots, I'm willing to hear the argument because I can see that just through my job how that can make people feel like their vote doesn't count.
Do you think the 2020 presidential election in Pennsylvania and elsewhere was valid and that the results were fair?
Yeah, I was never somebody who was a naysayer on the election. You'll never find me signing any of the petitions or rallying to overturn the election. I think the election's over with. I think we need to move on from that era. At the end of the day, again, there were things that made people have doubt. There were people boarding up windows in Philadelphia at 2 a.m. I'm not saying that means there was fraud going on, but why would you even give people the reason to have doubt in the begin with, right? But again, I've never been somebody that was rallying to overturn the election. You'll never find anything that says I wanted to overturn the election. That wasn't my stance. I say we move forward. Luckily, for the seat I'm running for, 119th district, I don't think that's a big issue. I think people have far greater priorities. They're worried about their paychecks. They're worried about their pensions. They're worried about the price at the gas pump, the price at the grocery store. I think that's just one of those issues people try to get into to lock candidates up and force them into corners when the everyday voter probably doesn't care.
What about allowing the boards of elections to start counting those mail-in ballots earlier so that we don't have a repeat of what happened in 2020 where they were 2 days later still counting the mail-in ballots?
As a candidate, I want to know who won by the end of the night. right? I think the county has since taken steps to buy a machine that will do it in a day. So if it's technology that we need to use to count mail-in ballots, I think whatever gets us the answer by the end of the day, right? Now there needs to be protocols in place so that you have a checks and balance, but I think they've done that. I think they've created a standard operating procedure to make sure you can go back and audit if you have to. So as long as those parameters are in place, I don't think there's anything wrong with knowing at the end of the night who won, because certainly, my opponent in the primary, he was one of the guys who was waiting on mail-in ballots, right?
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that the state law prevents the boards of elections from starting that process until after the polls close.
Yeah, and so I think now, if I was following the news correctly, you might be able to correct me, they're able to start counting at 7 a.m. using a machine, and it has to be done by midnight. So I'm willing to see how that works out.
I think the distinction here is you're allowed to pre-canvass, which means you can open up the envelope, the outer envelopes,
Mm-hmm.
and remove the ballots, but you can't count them until after the polls close. Do I understand that correctly?
And I think Florida, for instance, was able to start the counting process earlier in the day, which is why they...
Oh, I thought we can already do that. I support that. I'm in support of allowing them to be able to count that.
Okay, fine. Yeah, you can't count them in Pennsylvania
Until the polls close. Yeah, they're allowed to open the envelopes and kind of line all the papers up.
Oh, okay. I thought I
But
had.
they can't run them through the machines.
So I was under the notion that they can start counting at 7 a.m.
No, they can open the envelopes, but they can't.
No, okay. So I would be in support of them starting to count when the polls are open. Let them start tallying.
Government ethics and transparency, do you have any proposals regarding those issues?
There's nothing that comes to the top of my mind. Is there any legislation you're referencing, or? I think a lot of people want to see the gift ban removed for
The per diem
legislators.
is one that often comes up.
I will not be taking the per diem. I guess it would be your predecessor, Jerry Mullery, was always attacked for his use of the per diem. I tend to follow somebody like an Aaron Coffer, where if you make an expense, you send it to the state, you get reimbursed. That's the system I would model. I'm not looking to have a house in Harrisburg. I'm not looking to take a state car or state phone. Any perks like that from the job, I'm not interested in.
Do you support any changes regarding gun regulation?
I think common sense gun legislation is important. I am somebody who's pro Second Amendment. I've been a lifelong hunter. Firearm safety has been taught in my household since I was a child. I think right now there's not too much to change. I think a lot of people wanted to see assault rifles or assault style rifles banned until you're 21. I think the federal government stepped in and took care of that. And so now it's just about listening to what people want to see next, if anything, right?
What's your position on the red flag laws that would allow a court to take someone's weapons if they feel they're a threat to the community or themselves?
Again, that's another convoluted issue. People like to water it down to saying, if a court deems somebody not capable of having a firearm, we would all say that's a good idea, right? If somebody's not supposed to have a firearm, they're not supposed to have a firearm. Unfortunately, the legislation doesn't get written that way. They put in all these different anecdotes that make it so that you lose your due process of law. And I'm a constitutionalist. I believe in due process, as I would with any industry, police officers, anything like that. You have your day in court, and whatever's decided was decided. Now, whatever happens before then, I do not support.
And so, regarding assault weapons, you don't see the need to ban them or restrict
I do
the
not.
sale of assault weapons?
I do not support the outright ban of assault rifles, or assault style rifles, if you will.
And, in light of the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade, what is your position on abortion?
It's all about viability. So I am personally pro-life. I don't hide that. I don't believe it's right. But Pennsylvania right now protects abortions up to 24 weeks. If you look at some of the most liberal states that surround us, Delaware, New York, they cap it at 20 weeks. And so Pennsylvania is actually farther along than our most liberal neighboring states. So my proposal is you don't outright ban abortion, right? You figure out how to limit it, and you figure out how to base it on viability. So I think there's a discussion to be made to bring the amount of weeks down, maybe somewhere between 16 and 20 weeks, because I believe, a baby could survive in the womb after that time. But I would not support outright banning abortion. I would not support, there's a lot of people that say the cases of rape, incest, life of the mother. I support all that. I think there's people out there that want to get rid of emergency contraceptive and contraceptive as a whole. I do not support banning that.
What do you think about legalizing marijuana for recreational uses?
I support the recreational, making marijuana legal recreationally.
Any thoughts on regarding LGBTQ rights and passing a law to codify same-sex marriage?
I support it. I was recently at the gala event this past weekend. I'm an ally of the LGBTQ community. I think it's a common sense, get government out of, some of this stuff, right? Let people just live their lives. That's sort of the model I was raised by.
One of your campaign flyers, you criticized your opponent for being a hardcore Biden supporter and the leader of a special interest group. I'm assuming you're referring to his position as teachers union president.
I believe those flyers came from the PAGOP. So I don't design those and I don't send those out. I've seen, I see them. They come to my house just as much as they go to everybody else's house. But
you disagree with that assessment?
He is I would say that himself is I would say he's actually too far left for Luzerne County. I don't think he's a Luzerne County Democrat. I would say he does align with the far left movement. He had Malcolm Kenyatta, which is a 100% defund the police vote, 100% with the ACLU. He's a liberal representative from Philadelphia. He brought him here to Mountaintop on the anniversary of John Wilding's death to knock on doors. My opponent has taken endorsements from Brian Sims. He's taken endorsements from Action Together. I don't think he represents Northeast Pennsylvania values, even the Northeast Pennsylvania Democrats I know, right?
Mm-hmm. And what about, it says that he's pushing a radical agenda and opposes classroom transparency. Do you agree with that?
My opponent was reprimanded by his school board for having bumper stickers on his desk that were of only left-leaning politics, stickers that said "No justice, no peace, resist," stickers Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders. He had a legalized weed sticker on his desk as a high school teacher. So I think you should keep politics out of the classroom. If you are in the position of a social studies teacher, or if you're teaching history or something like that, you have to show both sides. I don't think you should be somebody who's advocating one way or the other, because then you're going to have parents that ask, is he grading papers based on political views?
And that same flyer also criticizes him for lobbying Tom Wolf for implementing school shutdowns and masking policies.
Yeah, he joined Tom Wolf here in Northeast Pennsylvania. Tom Wolf was on a tour pushing mask mandates for schools, and my opponent was right next to his side. It even gave a little speech. I do not support the school shutdowns. Now, I think we're out of COVID by now. I don't think this is really coming up on the horizon, but I think the lockdowns and mandates were not needed. I think people should make their own decisions based on their own family and their beliefs, and that's how I am. I'm vaccinated, my family's vaccinated, but I think, again, the government should not be involved. It should be individual rights. It should be people, living their life as it fits their views.
What do you think of the Mastriano agenda? Are there aspects of his agenda that you disagree with?
I haven't looked at his agenda too closely. I stay out of all these races. As I said before, I have supporters that have my sign next to Shapiro and Fetterman signs, and I have my signs next to Mastriano and Oz. I don't have anybody else's sign in my yard. I didn't endorse any candidates. I stay out of those races because at the end of the day, I'm signing up for a job to represent both sides, right? Certainly, there are a lot of people that claim Mastriano's rhetoric is too far right and too crazy. I like to call myself a moderate. I think I'm, I was a Republican elected in Plymouth for the first time in a handful of decades. I like to get people across the aisle to come and vote for me. I'm not a believer in you should go into office with 50% of the population disagreeing with you or disagreeing with your views.
How much do you plan to spend on the general election campaign? And who
In
are your
dollars?
primary funding sources?
I don't know what the total budget will be at the end of the day. This will probably end up being a $500,000 race. If I had to assume, just looking at past races and local elections elsewhere. I was on my own in the primary. I ran against Tom Williams. You guys are familiar with that. I was primarily funded by business owners, local business guys that want to see a change to Pennsylvania's business structure. I like to think I'm a champion of the business community as a candidate. So it will continue to be, pro-business groups that support, making sure the legislature works for everyday Pennsylvanians.
And you mentioned that I guess it was the Pennsylvania GOP had sent out a flyer or other flyers. How much have they? How much have they spent on this campaign so far?
So they didn't do anything for my primary. They stay out of primaries. I think they've already sent out maybe 7 mailers. I don't know the price on those. I don't pay those bills. They say paid for by the PAGOP. I think as a whole, it's going to be a $500,000 race. I don't plan on raising $500,000. I probably won't end up spending that. But I think as a whole, with all of the state, me, and any other third-party group that supports me, I think it's going to be a $500,000 race.
How much do you think your committee is going to end up spending?
So we've already, in the primary, we spent close to $100,000, I think was what your report was. We're going to end up raising probably $250,000. I think I've already raised $200,000.
Are there any plans for a debate?
The League of Women Voters did reach out, and I agreed. I think it's in the planning stages now. Vito requested a forum with the League of Women Voters, and I said I'm interested, and that was yesterday. So I received confirmation today from the president for the Wilkes-Barre League that they're going to, I guess they're going to find a location, find moderators, they're going to facilitate that. I think we will end up having at least one debate before the election.
Any more questions?
Anything else?
I think we're out of questions.
No way you're out of questions.
Well, for now.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks for coming in.
Of course. Thank you very much.
Nice to meet you.
So I'm doing an article on the campaign, so I'll give you a call for